All right, Alexi McCammond, who made her name as a politics reporter at the Washington News at Axios, had planned to start as the editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue next Wednesday. Now, after Teen Vogue staff members publicly condemned racist and homophobic tweets Ms. McCammond had posted a decade ago, she has resigned from the job. Condé Nast, Teen's Vogue publisher, announced the abrupt turn on Thursday in an internal email that was sent amid pressures from the publication's staff, readers, and at least 2 advisors, just 2 weeks after the company had appointed her to the position. After speaking with Alexi this morning, we agreed that it was best to part ways so as to not overshadow the important work happening at Teen Vogue. Stan Duncan, the chief people officer at Condé Nast, said in the email, which was obtained by the New York Times. Okay, so if you haven't heard by now, this is the lady. She was supposed to be the editor of Teen Vogue. Obviously, she's not going to be now.
Maybe in the future.
It's possible. I mean, I've watched a lot of people have reactions to this. Really notable people, like one of them was Anna Kasparian at TYT, the Young Turks Network. And I was actually quite surprised at a lot of the, I would say, the alternative media's reaction to this. So for me, and my big problem that I've seen thus far is there's been a lot of opinions about this from a lot of different people. Yet throughout this whole discourse, I haven't heard a lot of people in the media that are Asian speaking about this, because while what she said was obviously controversial in terms of, you know, what she said in her tweets about gay people, but I think what was more graphic and a lot more controversial was what she said about Asians. And I was amazed when I watched Anna in her whole 15-20 minute video. She never once showed any tweets about what she said about Asians. She showed tweets about what she said about gay people. And I'll be honest, a lot of her anti-gay comments were kind of pretty typical of what you see at immature people in middle school. Granted, she was a senior in high school when she tweeted this stuff, which I think does make a big difference. There's a big difference between being an 8th grader and a senior in high school in terms of your mental and emotional development. But it was just kind of your run-of-the-mill, lame-o kind of, oh, that's gay kind of thing, right? Which, you know, obviously isn't right, but it's more lexicon, and you want to clean that stuff up out of your language when you do become an adult, and you don't want people to think you're homophobic. But I think what she said about Asians was on another level, in the sense that it was more graphic, and also she had a personal problem with somebody who was Asian, and rather than confronting that person or just being angry at that person, it became a racist rant. And I was amazed at how Anna Kasparian never made mention of it. She even showed the anti-gay tweets, but never showed the anti-Asian tweets. So throughout all this discourse, what has bothered me is there hasn't been enough Asian folks weighing in on this. So I'm going to let you talk now, because you are Asian and you're speaking from experience. So I'll give my opinion later.
So this came to my attention because I'm part of I joined a group of writers who, a lot of, they're in the media industry, and they discuss random things. And I saw this post where they were like, really, should she be condemned for something that she wrote when she was 17? And I don't know what I was thinking. For some reason, I thought it was about Bieber's wife.
Justin Bieber?
Yeah. So I clicked on it, and then I started reading, and I had actually seen like these headlines that didn't give a whole lot of context. And so sort of like what Scott's talking about is everything I read did not provide enough context. And I think I spent a whole day digging, and the more I dug, the more I learned, and the worse it sounded. And I feel like the media has only scratched the surface, although it depends on what media you read, because as I was reading, I found a whole lot of different things that now I can't seem to access. So, because, you know, I got that short-term memory.
Yeah. Well, you showed me all the tweets.
So,
yeah.
I will say, like, even if you want to look, like, why this is even relevant, it was even brought up in LinkedIn, I think, midweek this past week, and I read those comments, and once again, I could tell all of those comments it was a lot of emotion and not a whole lot behind them other than you could tell people were just vocalizing their own personal experience. But the thing about her tweets, and the more I dug in, it made more sense what her tweets were about. And maybe I can find it, I don't know. But
well, while you're looking, I could say one thing. I hate the term cancel culture.
Yes, and that's the reason why
so annoyed by this. Yeah,
this has really hit the news really big, is because everybody's talking about cancel culture, but we're talking about reality, and we're talking about how long racism has been in the United States, and how racist the U.S. really is. And that's the bigger topic, and not this, like...
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I just hate the term cancel culture because it becomes about that terminology, cancel culture. You know, we're living in a pandemic right now. There's over 30 million people that have lost their job. There's food insecurity. There's problems with health insurance. We're still funding all these endless wars all over the world. We're not even taking care of ourselves here. There's so many things to talk about, and the focus becomes cancel culture rather than racism, which is what this is about here today. And it's pretty disturbing, some of the stuff. And here's the tweets. I'm going to get out of the way.
Oh, this actually isn't the tweet. This actually goes back even further. Back in 2010, McCammond actually won a scholarship. So she was, and somewhere in all of my research, when she was in high school, she actually wanted to be a doctor. So this is how she ends up in probably a lot of chemistry classes. And so that's where all of her angst comes from.
I get it. We've all been there. I mean, obviously, it is tough when you're in school. I mean, it hasn't been that long since we haven't been in school. And it's frustrating. There's a lot of people, quote unquote, that are curve busters. But to really hate somebody because, you know, I'll say this. There are people that are going to annoy you in life. Fine. But it isn't their race that you're angry at. It's who they are as a person. And in this case, you know, her being angry about curve busters and things like that. Look, there are a lot of Asians that are very highly motivated, that are highly educated, and that's because they apply themselves. It's not because they have any heel up on anyone else in that regard, other than their parents supporting education. You just have to work harder yourself and work smarter, rather than hate the person next to you that does better, you know, scholastically. What?
I don't know that the tweet was, I actually don't have the exact verbiage of the
Well,
tweet.
she was angry at a proctor or somebody like that, a TA.
She was angry at the TA for grading her paper and giving her a 2 out of 10.
And then she didn't mark up specifically why.
But any TA has how many papers to grade, and there's only so much time to sit around and write, basically to re-educate you what you should have learned during class. Yeah,
I think she bombed the test, and rather than being mad at herself, she was angry at the TA.
And she then that's where her racial statements came from.
Yeah, and that's what annoys me, because that's what racists basically do. When they get into conflict with people, the first thing they say is that goddamn whatever, rather than that person's an asshole, and this is why, right? That's what all of us do that aren't racists. You know, and she went right to the race immediately. It made me think of a lot of different things, but I'm going to let you weigh in first. Or you've already weighed.
Well, yeah, I mean, she should have just did her schoolwork.
Yeah. But I think it's more than that. I think in a lot of ways, she was probably, obviously, let's talk about the elephant in the room here. Yes, she's very attractive, a very beautiful African-American woman, right? I could see how maybe she gets in with some of the snotty bitch crew, you know, and thinks she's better than everyone else. And that's kind of the impression I get from her. Like, she thought that she's, oh, I'm up here with all these blonde girls and all these other people are down here. And it kind of bothers me, you know, like you think at some point during her life, being black herself, that somebody made her feel bad about how she looks and that she wouldn't internalize that kind of racism on somebody else. No opinion on that?
That was a lot to process. This is half my conversation. There's so
Okay,
much
we'll get back to your conversations.
So I would say, I mean, and the thing is, there's, I think everybody's concerned that here's this poor woman who's lost her job, but I think the other thing to kind of bring to light is who she's dating.
Who is she? Oh, she was dating somebody that was being vetted for the Biden administration, right?
Correct. And then he went off on...
TJ Ducklow. What a
Mhm.
weird name, Ducklow.
And he went off on a reporter who was asking questions about their relationship. And so...
And let me guess, white guy?
Yeah.
So he was being vetted as a junior deputy press secretary. So, yeah, he's probably going to be working for Jen Psaki or Saki or however you say her name. Yeah, so one of the things that really annoys me too, this is another rant, people in politics, when they don't like you, instead of just having an out with you right there like every other goddamn human being does, what do? Like Cuomo? They say, I'll ruin you. I'll destroy you. You know what, man? If anybody ever said that shit to me, I'd knock them the fuck out. Seriously, some dude said that to me, and I'm in the press, and they're telling me they're going to destroy me. You know what? This is unbelievable. So he's an asshole, and that probably says a lot about her as well, right? Because seriously, I don't know anyone that I've ever been friends with that threatens people like that. That threatens to ruin you just because you asked a tough question. That's very Trumpian-like. You know, Cuomo did the same thing.
But
Yeah.
that's the age that we live in.
Yeah.
We only have a handful of years to figure all of this out.
Yeah, that's true.
Before we decide on a new president, or we're going to stick with this one.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's true. So
it's scary when you think about it, and that's why all of this matters, is because I understand that she was young, but 17 is old enough to drive a car, old enough to know right from wrong, old enough to know if what they're saying or doing is mean, and it seems like it just kind of perpetuates itself in some shape or form. And then that's how we end up with days where we have like Capitol riots. It's because of this perpetuation that we have constantly.
That's kind of, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I think in her case, she definitely has a strong sense of entitlement. Like, she felt like she could say whatever she wanted. And that's why I'm willing to bet that if we can go back into a time machine and walk into some of her classes and observe her, I'm sure she had a close-knit group of friends that thought they were better than everyone else. That's why she felt like she could say whatever the hell she wanted about someone. And there'd be no blowback, because there wasn't any blowback. Think about that. All those years, it wasn't until, 2 years ago that she acknowledged those tweets? Yeah, it was 2018.
A couple years, because somebody found it and approached her with it.
Right.
And so...
Yeah, she didn't come out and say it. And then she probably deleted it after, and someone already took a screenshot of it. Yeah.
Well, now it's been deleted. I think actually it might have been... Well, maybe it was deleted back then.
It doesn't matter. I mean, people will take screenshots of stuff you say, so deleting it doesn't really do anything at that point.
Yeah. But the thing is, the Asian American Journalist Association, they mentioned that she went and talked to them, but didn't say what they talked about, and that was sort of what kind of led me down this path. And once I found the report itself, I mean, of course, they were standing behind Asian American journalists, so it was they weren't supporting her to be an editor in chief. If this was the behavior that she was going to have in her past, because we don't really know what that would mean for the future. And at some point, there's some article somewhere where I found out that what kind of, I think, was the last straw was she was supposed to have a meeting right? with somebody from
China, right?
Teen Vogue, China. I mean, and this is the other thing that really, I mean, as much as everybody wants to talk about it, like how we deal with racism in the United States, it doesn't fly when you go over to other countries.
It's true, yeah. I mean, and just think about how many people, not only in China, but throughout all of Asia, that probably read that publication. Because it's America. Everyone loves Americans and teen, you know.
Well, you think that.
Well, they love
think that until, well, that's the thing.
They love the stars and things, you know what I mean?
You think some, and there are some that do love, you know, Americans, but there are plenty who don't.
Well, that's my point. And I think partly that's why, you know.
There are plenty who are, you go overseas and they'll tell you to go home and see how that feels. Because you're like, oh, I've never had anybody say that to me.
Right,
You just go abroad and you'll find out real fast that Americans aren't the most liked people. Yeah. And if we keep walking around thinking, like, the way we can walk around here and say whatever we want and all those freedoms that we're allowed, we don't have those same freedoms elsewhere. So that's why I think this is way more complicated than people shed light to, and some of the comments that they say, it doesn't, that's fine that you want to talk about it in this little cluster, but when you start going out, it becomes a real issue. So that here with her, I mean, I can understand if the editor-in-chief in China, or maybe she's even located here. I have no idea where she's located. I didn't even look that up. But bottom line, if she's like, I don't even want to take a meeting with this woman, I can't say I blame her. Yeah,
and I was going to say, that's a big market for Teen Vogue magazine is Asia. You could imagine how many readers they probably have there. I mean, 1.6 billion people in China alone.
Right, and I mean, as much as we sit around and say, you know, we're anti this and anti that, in business, that is considered an emerging market.
Yeah. That
is where they're going to put their money, because they've done enough in America. Yeah. There might be a few segments that they haven't reached, depending on what company it is. But most companies I've worked for, it's all about the emerging markets, and they are all the markets that we hear all these racist comments about.
Yeah.
Which is even funnier, because there are other people vying for foreign currency. And that foreign currency is showing up in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true, especially in California, Bay Area. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and we talk about it all the time, is like racism in California feels a whole lot different than it does in other parts of the United States. So.
Yeah, you know, and then this leads to the next question, because we already know she can't be the editor because she's just a liability at this point. There's, Burt's Bees, and somebody else was going to pull their marketing.
Ulta Beauty, who's part of $1 billion business in beauty. I mean, women buy a ton of cosmetics. Maybe men too, actually, now that I think about it.
Not this man, but yeah.
Well, you still buy soap. So.
I do, but I buy like the really cheap stuff, Dial.
Until you like get into my fancy box and you don't realize, actually one of our soaps does come from Ulta.
Okay, well.
You haven't used it in a while, but
all right.
Either way, it was, so between Ulta and Burt's Bees, it was, I want to say, $1.2 million in advertising that they have with Teen Vogue, and they basically suspended it because they had gotten word that she was going to be an editor-in-chief. And for me, because I was going back and forth with somebody, and these companies put in a whole lot of money to create diversity and inclusion, and to bring somebody in like that just kind of goes against all of that work that has happened. But then even more than that, you can start putting dollars to all of this. So between Burt's Bees and Ulta, $1.2 million campaign. She's already a $1.2 million liability, not to mention those 20 people who are like against it. So go ahead and put their salaries in, add those all up, because those are potentially people who are completely unhappy and will potentially leave if that's what, depending on, I can totally understand people need a job, but let's just suppose they have a choice to go somewhere else, they probably would jump ship. So that's another $1 million. So she's a $2.2 million liability.
Yeah.
And that's not even to talk about the future of who wants to put an ad in this magazine with all this different publicity that's around her and her name. And I know if I were a sales, if I were doing ads at a company and I had to constantly fight that, I'd be like, you know what, you can't even hold me accountable for my number when you're the one who went out and supported this person coming in and causing this rift. I'm like, what ads am I going to sell to anybody who's like, yeah, well, you're just not culturally diverse enough or culturally sensitive enough to have my ad dollars.
Yeah.
So I viewed it more from a business standpoint more than anything else, I think.
You know what that makes me think of? Fox News with Roger Ailes.
Right. You and I talked about
Roger
that.
Ailes, Bill O'Reilly. Well, they were the two biggest sexual harasser rapists on that network. There were quite a few, actually. I never heard much about Tucker Carlson or the other jerk off that's there. I can't think of his name. Or Hannity, Sean Hannity. But O'Reilly, you just heard this over and over again. And it finally came out, I remember 3 or 4 years ago, which led to O'Reilly leaving. They spent, just on O'Reilly alone, they spent over $30 million settling his cases. Settling his cases. That is crazy that they would even go that far, you know what I mean? And Roger Ailes was another one. I mean, millions were spent on him, and he finally left before, his health got the best of him. It's just unbelievable. And I'd heard for years that Fox was just a terrible place to work if you were a woman. Women got completely taken advantage of there. And, it's interesting. Whenever you would watch Fox News, like the female news anchors, they were all like really smoking hot. And you'd sit there and you'd wonder, why are they even on this network? It's just for how they look, you know what I mean? Yeah. And that's a good thing, people. This is just a little bit of advice. If you're looking for a good media network and all the women there are smoking hot, they're probably not a legit media company. You should see like different, like life. When you walk outdoors, yeah, some chicks are smoking hot, others are not. That's how it should look. Same thing with dudes. If every guy on there looks like a Ken doll, probably not an expert in their field. So anything else you want to add? Well, I guess the next question, and this is what I was completely berated with by people, on YouTube and everything else that were sending me stuff. They were, what should we do? Should she be forgiven? This whole sort of thing. And I'm not saying don't forgive the woman. I'm not at all saying that. But what I am saying is you can't give her the editor-in-chief job with a past like that. And then the other thing is, I don't feel bad for her. She can go back to work for Axios. No one's going to ban Axios. It's a very good news publication. They do a lot of good work there. I read a lot of Axios articles myself. But, I think what would really help things, in my opinion, is if she could just, shed some light on what her thinking was at that time and what is her thinking now. But it's kind of hard to be too optimistic about what she would ever say, because it seems like her boyfriend's an asshole too.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. She was given the opportunity. She wrote a letter.
She just said, "I'm sorry," but I want to know.
There was not a whole lot of substance behind it.
Correct.
Other than,
that's what I mean. Substance should be a big thing in all of this.
Yeah, I couldn't quite understand, like, when they said, like, what type of action plan they were going to have. Mm-hmm. I wasn't sure if that meant Teen Vogue was going to have or McCammond. So that's the thing. You really have to read between the lines, and sometimes I don't like reading between lines. I just prefer facts. So
yeah, I'm the same way here.
I go digging for, like, true words. In that letter, she had the opportunity, I felt like, to give context. And that was the other thing, talk about money. The other thing that they pulled everybody into a meeting. And I have no idea how many people they have. I assume it's like when I used to have meetings. I mean, if you're going to talk about diversity in a company, you got to bring in the hundreds. So all those hundreds of salaries going into this room for an hour to listen to why she should still be hired, or, what she brings to the table, like having to sell that to everybody in the company. That was just, I think it's insane.
I think what was interesting too was the resistance came within the company. It didn't necessarily come from outside of the company.
Right, which they were, and of course, Anna Wintour, if she stands behind you, they'll try to forge you in somehow, which I thought was a very interesting take, being that, so the back history, even more of this, is that they had another, I want to say it was an editor, who I guess back in his teen years, or college years, whichever, there's a picture of him in blackface. And so they already have an issue. And Wintour's like, no, we'll bring you in. We'll support you. And it takes an editor from, of Teen Vogue China to be like, no. I mean, that's where the buck stops, because it's like, now we're talking about truly having to work with other people internationally.
Yeah, it's a bit ironic because, I know there's been a lot of outside pressure over the years for a lot of decision makers for companies, especially in media, to make sure that there's diverse people looking over the material that you're about to publish, rather than just having essentially white faces looking this stuff over. Because, truthfully, when you're white, you don't have the same experience people of color have in America. And yeah, it was a good thing that they hired an African-American woman. Great. The only problem was she thinks like everyone else, right? And you don't want more of the same. You want somebody that's going to give a really honest look at how they're portraying, people all the way across the board that are Americans. Because in America, we are a diverse group of people from top to bottom. And you definitely don't want somebody there that extremely biased. And that's why it's good to have a lot of people looking at this material. So, yeah. And I think therein lies another problem in America. We never really have this serious talk about race in America. It's interesting because, I think oftentimes people in certain positions, oftentimes coaches or, name any position you want to talk about, CEOs of other companies will oftentimes say something controversial or insensitive, and they get fired, and sometimes, a lot of times they don't get fired, but they never really have the actual talk that you need to have about race. Because I think oftentimes in society, somebody says something racist, and the dialogue isn't really there. There's the group of people that are offended, and then there's the group of people that are racist themselves, bigots themselves, that want to defend that person. And that's not really having an honest talk about race. I think having an honest talk about race is, yeah, you talk to somebody who made a racist statement and have some dialogue with them and with that person and try to educate that person on the flaws of their thinking. And I could say there's been several times in my life where within the sports context, where I actually had some tough conversations with friends of mine. And I think it was much better in the end to have that discussion because it was interesting, and I don't want to get into that story fully, but I remember one particular instance. There were two white guys that were football players, black head coach. And I remember both of them didn't really like the head coach. And of course, immediately the topic became race. And I remember listening to what the one vocal player was saying about him. And I said, everything you're complaining to me about has nothing to do with him as a coach. It sounds like this is your bullshit hang up on black folks. That's your bigotry. You're putting it here on full display. And I went back and forth for 2 hours arguing with these two guys. And you know what was really interesting? The next day, excuse me, the next day, not the guy that was arguing with me aggressively, but the other guy that was sort of tacitly agreeing came up to me and said, you know what, you were right. I shouldn't have said those things. My problems with the coach was really personal between he and I, had nothing to do with his race. And I made it about race because I let people like that influence my thinking. And I thought, that's a great moment.
And
right
do you
there.
feel like when he said all of that it continued, or was it just in that moment?
No, I think I got through to him. I really did. Because he didn't have to say anything to me. It was 24 hours later, and I run into him, we're on to other things, and he just made a point to tell me, hey, man.
Well, I meant by his actions on the field or in your... Because that's it. So my only point here is there are plenty of people who will come up and you feel like they're your ally.
Yeah.
And then at some point you realize, but then they start wandering off and something else happens and it seems to have gone back.
Well, I could say this. He was upset with his coach because, long story short, the coach basically played him in a position that wasn't really ideal for him. And he came into the season trained a certain way, weighing a certain weight to play a certain position, and then they move him to another position that he's just not prepared to do well, right? So basically, he wasn't prepared to have success. And the coach wasn't preparing him properly to have success because he put him out of position. And that's what he was angry about. I said, and I get your anger there. That's true. That has nothing to do with race. The other guy, wanted to turn that as a reason to say something disparaging about black coaches. And it's crazy. Because especially at that time when I had that argument with him, that was probably late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, obviously there were more black coaches then than 10 years prior, but compared to today, there were still not a lot of black coaches at that time, head coaches. And I felt like I needed to have that dialogue with him. And I think that's what we need to do in society and I think the reason why he was so receptive to what I had to say is he didn't feel like I was judging him per se. I was just challenging him. And I wasn't making him feel like less of a human being. In a lot of ways, I was encouraging him to be a better human being. And I think he appreciated that because that's what friends do. In fact, that guy, I'll say his name is Dan, is a good friend of mine. And I got through to him because of that. Now, the other guy, I'll say Colin is his name. I wasn't really very close with him. I mean, I respect the guy, but we just weren't that close. And I think that probably had a lot to do with it. And just his closed-mindedness and his unwillingness to have these conversations, because I've been in weird situations with race throughout my whole entire life. I remember being in an ethnic studies class with Zelty Crawford at the College of San Mateo, very famous ethnic studies teacher. And I remember a guy that played football at my high school, was younger than me. I didn't play with him. I graduated when he was like a freshman or a sophomore. I guess a sophomore or junior, something like that. And I remember seeing him, one of his girlfriends was like half black, half Pacific Islander, something like that, which pertains to this. And I thought they were a very happy couple, right? They were. But what, interestingly enough, I had a good friendship with his girlfriend. We got along really good, and I pretty much got to know her in Zelti's class. And what I found really interesting was we were talking about the first gun laws in California, and this has to do with race, if you're not familiar. Ronald Reagan was the governor of California. And at that time, California was an open carry state, which is hard to believe nowadays, but it was. And essentially what happened that changed public opinion in California about open carry really had to do with the Black Panthers. Because the Black Panthers were basically defending their neighborhoods against a lot of things. Against drug dealing, against, strong arm robbery, things like that. And also against police brutality. It was a show of force. And it was defense, not offensive. It was strictly self-defense. And it got to the point where it really rattled police and rattled a lot of white America, well, a lot of white Californians, I should say. And that bill, in 2 weeks, that bill was on Governor Reagan's desk, and he signed it into law. And I always like to point that out to conservatives that are so pro-gun, because they're not really pro-gun. They're pro-gun as far as, well, white people like me carrying a gun. But the minute, black folks, black nationalists possibly, are carrying guns. Oh, wait a minute. That's not good. So, and I always laugh and joke, and I get conservatives all the time. I always tell them, you know who the first person was to create gun legislation in California? Ronald Reagan, your God, your hero. That was the guy that introduced gun control to California. It wasn't no liberal. It wasn't no tree-hugging hippie. It was your great God, the slayer of Russia or the Soviet Union, Ronald Reagan. That's the guy that introduced the first gun laws to California. And why did they do it? It had to do with race. They didn't like the idea of black folks having guns and protecting themselves because they like having the upper hand. It's interesting, isn't it?
It is. It's interesting because it's the lack of gun laws that has caused a lot of heartache in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think for, a lot of people, obtaining guns in the United States is a very easy thing. And not just any old guns, AR-15s, in many cases, AK-47s. Some people, I forget what the name of the gun is that's, I guess it is an AR-15. That's basically an M16, but it's not automatic, but it can be converted to automatic. Yeah, those are weapons that allows an individual to kill scores and scores of people in minutes. But also, I would throw in there mental illness. It's another problem in the United States that we don't talk about enough. Yes. You're much better off, coming to terms with your mental illness and getting treatment. But see, a lot of people see that as a weakness, and I never understood that. To me, it's like if you have a hamstring injury or a knee injury, no one says you're less of a person. So why do people feel that way about mental illness? It's crazy. So yeah, I think it's a combination of mental illness. I think it's also a lack of expression, an inability to articulate what you're going through, and the availability of guns. Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, obviously in Britain, you can't get guns like that. And if you have any doubts about what I'm saying, remember the London Bridge stabbings that was committed by a terrorist? You ever wonder why he used a knife? Because he can't get a gun in Britain. Yeah. Now, I'm not suggesting we get rid of guns. I'm not one of those people that wants to do that. But I am suggesting that there should be some demonstration of proficiency, much like a driver's license, because that is a lethal weapon where you can kill scores and scores of people in minutes as well. And you have to prove you're proficient enough to own and operate an automobile. And that, you'll be responsible. It should be the same way with guns. You go to a gun show, you don't even have to do background checks. You just buy it and take off with the gun. It's really crazy. And I've known people that own M16s and, like AK-47s and things like that. Hey, check this out. And I'm just like, oh my God. And I know people that think, they're preparing for the apocalypse or God knows what else. They feel like they have to have, how I protect my family and everything. Okay. So, my question, I guess, was other people's question to you. What should be done about her? Should she be forgiven?
Well, for me, it was just, and I've said it, it's a global economy. And if you're a publication relying on companies that are global, you can't afford to have this type of behavior, no matter what, at what level. So I think the only thing I had said to my group was, hopefully she can find a job at Axios. If they really love her and think she's great, then they should create a job. They should create a position for her.
Or just go back to her old position.
She worked for Axios.
Yeah.
So, but my guess is the reason why she left Axios was basically what was happening with her and her boyfriend, and how that played into.
That is true, because so they were basically going up the elevator, so to speak.
Yeah, until they got stopped.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. It just seems like the two of them, I don't know them personally, but just based on how he reacted to some of these questions, I definitely don't want that kind of person being a press secretary or a junior or whatever the hell his position is. Mm-hmm. I don't want somebody like that. I don't want somebody that's working for us on our dime that's going to threaten reporters. Right. I like reporters. Yep. I think reporters should ask tough questions. I think reporters should make press secretaries and presidents and chiefs of staff uncomfortable. That's their goddamn job. Yeah. It's not your job to be friends with politicians. Your job is to challenge politicians. Yeah. That's your job. And to inform us. And it just grinds my gears when you look at cable news now. It's so advertiser driven, for profit. So they specialize in these niche kind of positions and commentary, right? Where they don't really present the facts. They just give you a spin, constant spin. And the more spin they give you, the more they rile up their audience, the more funding they get. Mm-hmm. And I think that needs to end. I've really had it up to here with any kind of cable news. I mean, to me, it's just entertainment. I don't really take it seriously. The only time I really watch it is at night when I get home. I want to catch up on things that happened during the day. What was the results of the election? What was this runoff where? Just stuff like that. I don't get my actual policy positions based on, whoever, Lou Dobbs, Rachel Maddow, whoever. They don't create my policy. I create my policy positions. I think there's too much of this sheep-like thinking in America lately where, what does the great leader say? Give me my talking points so I can argue with people. I hate that term, talking points. Mm-hmm. Talking points memo. That's shit. You should have your own talking points. Why do you need someone else's? I'm like, oh.
But that's also the problem with what's going on in our world and this, our go-getter mentality.
Laziness, too.
We only have X amount of time to gather up this information. Mm-hmm. So we gather it for, an hour sitting in front of the television on mm-hmm. one channel. And then that's the basis of everything. And I think, if anything, I always come to you to ask these questions because you sit around and read all these things all day. So I get a pretty diverse opinion. But that's the thing. After reading all of this and kind of going through it, even though I sort of knew it, and which is why I always go to Scott first and then go from there. But it's just the stories. It is. The media creates their spin on it, and they say whatever they need to bring you into their world so that they can use you as, we have this many viewership, mm-hmm. And this is why you should spend this much with us to advertise. And
it's even happening on YouTube now.
Yeah.
You'll see YouTube commentators, alternative media people, and they find accidentally sometimes, when I talk about this subject matter in this type of way, I suddenly got 1,000 subscribers in one day, or 100,000 in a month, right? And that means hundreds of thousands of dollars in the pocket of the YouTube creator because of the way the algorithms work. So yeah, it's becoming very market driven. Everything is now. So you have to be really careful with where you're getting your facts from, especially medical knowledge in regards to the pandemic. And, I really wanted to talk about this today because I wanted you to weigh in on this situation, because everyone I've been talking to is just, forgive her, cancel culture bullshit, and I'm like, wait a minute, like, you don't tolerate things like that. Why are you, it's just interesting how you put a sexy term to it, like cancel culture, right? Then you can kind of completely sweep under the rug whatever happened. Oh, cancel culture, right? Because the minute you say cancel culture, oh yeah, that's bullshit, right? You don't even know the story. And I think Anna Kasparian did this whole entire segment and never even saw those tweets about what she said about Asians. And it's funny, I left that in the comment section, and I think maybe one person responded, and it was a Republican saying black people don't speak out against other black folks that say controversial or racist things. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting that you're an expert on black folks. That's fascinating. Give me some examples, and of course they don't have any. And that's my point. Like, quit putting everyone in a box. She's an asshole. Not because she's black, because she's just an asshole, right? It is what it is. Let's call it what it is. And let's have real dialogue from here on out. I would love that. I mean, I'm not holding my breath, but...
You and I can have a conversation.
Yeah, there you go. Anything else you want to add to this, baby?
No, I think I'm sure there's more, but we're going to leave it at that.
Leave a comment if you want. We don't really give a shit. I mean, say what you want to say. I mean, I think there's just too many people going into their corners and not really weighing in honestly on this stuff. And yeah, if you got a real honest opinion, please leave it. If you're just a partisan hack, fuck you. That's kind of where I'm at right now. All right, this channel is Fugitive Vet. I designed this channel many years ago to be like a performance car video channel, car relating stuff, and hip hop music related stuff. And I seem to do everything but that lately. Too many things on my plate. All right, if you like it, give me a like, subscribe. Otherwise, I'll see you later, all right? Peace out.